As you sail south down the Nile, there is a strange mountain rising abruptly from the flat Nubian desert that surrounds you. This peculiar rock formation was seen as something much more than just a hill by the ancient Egyptians and the Kushites. It was believed to be the home of Amun himself, a sacred place where kings were crowned and divine authority was made visible on earth. It is called Jebel Barkal, and it was one of the holiest sites in Africa. In this video, we'll explore the ancient Kingdom of Kush, a civilization very often overshadowed by their popular neighbor, Egypt, and we'll see how Jebel Barkal connects to their history. It probably is one of the most obscure wonders in Civilization VI, so let's see what we can learn of its history from how it has been implemented. In Civilization VI, Jebel Barkal provides the following bonuses: +6 iron per turn, and +4 faith to all cities within 6 tiles. Okay, so I will admit that I had no idea what Jebel Barkal even is, before seeing it in Civilization VI. Without looking into it, I assumed that it was an ancient mining complex or something like that, purely based on the iron that it provides in-game. Well, it turns out I was quite a bit off, but both the bonuses are very justifiable when looking at the actual history. However, it is impossible to talk about Jebel Barkal without going a bit in detail about the ancient Kingdom of Kush, ancient Egypt, and how these two civilizations interacted for centuries. The rise of the ancient city of Napata in the 15th century BC around the hill of Jebel Barkal is a good place to start, although it is important to note that the rich history of the peoples of the area goes back thousands of years even before that. The city rose to prominence under the Egyptian pharaoh Thutmose III after the kingdom's conquests in the Nubian region against the Kingdom of Kerma. Now, before going further, we need to quickly clear up some naming confusion, because the history of this region can get very messy very fast. Nubia is the broad geographical term used for the area south of Egypt, along the Nile, in what is now northern Sudan and southern Egypt. Over thousands of years, different kingdoms rose there, like the aforementioned Kingdom of Kerma. So when people talk about the Kushites or ancient Nubia, they are often talking about overlapping cultures and kingdoms that existed in the same region across different periods of time. For simplicity's sake, I will be referring to all of these kingdoms as Kush from now on. So, let's go back to the early history of Napata, the city established in the shade of Jebel Barkal. During their occupation of the area, the Egyptians built a complex of temples below the hill, with the largest of them being a temple to Amun of Napata, a ram-headed version of the Egyptian deity. Even though Napata was primarily a Kushite city, it is very clear that Egypt heavily influenced it, especially through religion. However, the Egyptian New Kingdom collapsed and the Kushites returned to power in Napata and Jebel Barkal, establishing it as their capital. It is important to note that the Kushites continued to follow many Egyptian traditions as well as deities during this period. Kush actually conquered most of Egypt soon after, and ruled it during what we now call the 25th dynasty of Egypt. A series of Kushite pharaohs ruled over both Egypt and Nubia, who saw Napata as the heart of their large kingdom and made sure to expand Jebel Barkal and its importance. This dynasty would come to an end following a series of Assyrian invasions of Egypt, beginning under Esarhaddon in 671 BC and culminating in the sack of Thebes by Ashurbanipal in 663 BC, which finally drove the Kushites back south to their homelands. After this defeat, the Kingdom of Kush largely retreated back into Nubia. The city of Napata was eventually sacked by the Egyptians around 590 BC, forcing the Kushites to shift their center of power towards Meroe, which later became their new capital until the kingdom's eventual fall. During that period, relations between the Kushites and the Egyptians were mostly peaceful, establishing trade with each other for many years. From then on, the Kushite culture would become increasingly separated from that of Egypt's, with all traditions like that of their warrior queens, the Kandakes, returning. However, Napata never stopped being an important Kushite cultural and religious center, a place where the leaders of Kush were both crowned as well as buried for centuries. So this was a very simplified version of the history of Kush, which I hope provides some context on the importance of Jebel Barkal. We can now look at the actual in-game effects, starting with the faith bonus. As mentioned, many temples were built under the shade of Jebel Barkal, with the Temple of Amun being the largest of them. Jebel Barkal was believed by the Egyptians to actually be the residence of the major deity. Even though the Kushites and the Egyptians were rivals for much of their history, the god Amun held importance to both of them. This led to the shrine in Napata being a very important feature that was cared for by both civilizations. Many rituals and ceremonies were held in the temples surrounding Jebel Barkal, with the hill itself being venerated for centuries, so I think that is more than enough to explain the faith bonus. The site was so important to the Kushites that even after moving their capital to Meroe, they would continue to bury their leaders in its outskirts for centuries. I think we can use this to justify the faith bonus radiating outwards towards your other cities, a symbolic way to show how central Jebel Barkal was to the people of Nubia and beyond. Now, the iron bonus requires us to shift focus a bit. This bonus is not directly referencing Jebel Barkal, but is instead based on the knowledge we have of the civilization that is associated with it, this time the Kushites. We have seen this kind of bonuses in the past, most notably so far with the Temenanki, whose effects mostly relate to the peoples of ancient Mesopotamia, rather than the wonder itself. So what do the Kushites have to do with iron? Well, it turns out that they had developed quite a reputation when it comes to it. After the relocation from Napata to Meroe, the Kushites started to produce more and more iron tools and weapons, something that was not that easy to find, especially for that time. Meroe was situated near large deposits of oolitic iron ore, and apparently their blacksmiths were very experienced when it came to forging it. This surplus of iron, as well as gold, meant that the Kushites were very important trading partners to the Egyptians, the Greeks, and later the Romans. For Civ VI's purposes, it is obviously translated as the hefty +6 iron bonus that Jebel Barkal provides. The wonder requires the iron working technology. This obviously ties into the earlier iron bonus, but it gives me an opportunity to talk about Nubia's relation to iron in the larger scope of history. The presence of iron working in Africa seems to be quite a controversial subject. The debate comes to whether the technique of smelting iron ore and producing tools with it came to Nubia through contact with the Mediterranean or arose independently. Archibald Sayce referred to Meroe as the Birmingham of Africa because of all the iron slag that was found in the tombs located there, but this has started to be seen as somewhat of an exaggeration today. No matter the extent of the actual production of iron and the techniques used, it is inarguable that the Kushites are culturally tied to the metal, using it and trading it for centuries. The wonder must be built on desert hills. Once again, a very literal placement restriction that makes absolute sense. Jebel Barkal is an isolated sandstone hill rising directly out of the Nubian desert. There isn't much abstraction happening here. I mean, look at it. It's the definition of a desert hill. The placement of it near the Nile, as well as the shade it provided in the otherwise flat desert, made it a perfect site for the temple complex and settlement that were built around it.
At the southwest corner, a large perpendicular mass of sandstone has become separated by a deep fissure from the body of the mountain. It has all the appearance of a colossal statue.
The in-game quote comes from Wallis Budge, the British Egyptologist and philologist who travelled extensively through Egypt and Sudan in the late 19th century. In this description, he is referring to the enormous rock spire protruding from Jebel Barkal. This spire resembled the Uraeus, the rearing cobra associated with Egyptian royalty, and also evoked the white crown worn by pharaohs. I think the quote captures the strange visual presence of the mountain itself and helps to explain why the Egyptians might have seen it as a monument in of itself, deliberately placed in the landscape. Like many ancient sacred sites, Jebel Barkal gradually declined after the collapse of the Kushite kingdom and the spread of Christianity through Nubia. Napata was looted various times by various factions. However, the mountain and its temple complexes still survive today in the form of ruins. Compared to some of the other wonders we've talked about, it is actually very impressive how much of it still remains. Although the effects of Jebel Barkal are a bit lackluster, I can't help but like it. If only for the fact that it was an excuse for me to learn more about the incredibly interesting history of the Kingdom of Kush. I've only just scratched the surface with this video, but trust me when I say that there is so much to talk about. And yet, for a very long time, Kush tended to exist in the shadow of Egypt in popular history. Part of that is simply because Egypt left behind an enormous quantity of surviving monuments and written records, while much of Kushite history was harder to reconstruct archaeologically. It doesn't help that a lot of what we know about it comes from Egyptian sources, which would obviously be biased. Jebel Barkal is a nice reminder that the ancient world was much larger and more interconnected than the handful of civilizations people usually focus on. Even if the wonder itself is mechanically simple in Civilization VI, I do appreciate that the game included it at all, because it shines a spotlight on a kingdom that absolutely deserves more attention.